The Hypocrisy Experiment, When Labor Becomes a Crime. The Construction Edition. Construction is one of the most dangerous industries in the United States. Every year, hundreds of workers die on job sites, and thousands more are seriously injured. Falls, collapsing trenches, electrocutions, heavy equipment accidents, and toxic exposures are routine risks. Federal safety regulators closely track these dangers, and construction consistently ranks near the top of workplace fatality statistics. Here's how we know it's dangerous. We know the construction industry is dangerous because workplace injuries and deaths are systematically tracked by multiple government agencies, safety researchers, and insurance systems. Construction appears year after year among the most hazardous occupations in the country. And yet construction is completely legal. In fact, it is treated as essential labor. Cities cannot function without it. Homes, hospitals, roads, schools, and power lines all depend on people doing physically demanding and sometimes dangerous work, which raises an uncomfortable question. What would happen if we applied the same arguments often used to criminalize sex work to construction, two industries built on contract labor? At first glance, construction and the adult industry may seem unrelated, but structurally, the two industries share more similarities than most people realize. Both rely heavily on contract labor, subcontracting chains, and gig-style work arrangements where workers move from project to project rather than staying with a single employer. In both industries, some workers operate independently while others work through contractors, agencies, or crew leaders who organize projects, manage schedules, and coordinate workloads, sometimes all within the same job. Both industries also attract people who need income quickly or who may have limited access to traditional employment. Migrant workers, undocumented workers, and people operating in informal economies are common in both spaces. Neither industry functions because someone invented it as a moral debate. They exist because people are willing to pay for a service and others are willing to provide it. That is how labor markets tend to work. Risk is part of the work. Both industries also involve risk. Construction workers face obvious physical dangers: heights, unstable structures, heavy equipment, and environmental hazards. Workers in the adult industry face risks shaped not only by the work itself, but also by stigma, criminalization, and the legal frameworks surrounding the industry. In both sectors, labor exists for a straightforward reason. People seek the services offered. Buildings need to be constructed, roofs repaired, and infrastructure maintained. At the same time, people seek sexual services. Markets develop where people are willing to pay for a service, and others are willing to provide it. None of this is particularly mysterious. Can workers consent to dangerous labor? One of the arguments often raised in debates about sex work is that the risks involved make meaningful consent impossible. But if risk alone invalidated consent, a large portion of the global labor market would suddenly become suspect. Construction workers knowingly take on dangerous work every day. They climb scaffolding, operate heavy machinery, enter unstable structures, and work in environments where serious injury is possible. Yet society generally accepts that construction workers can consent to doing this labor. The policy response to dangerous work is usually not criminalization. It is safety standards, training requirements, protective equipment, workers' compensation systems, and workplace oversight. In other words, when labor is risky, the policy response is usually risk management, not declaring workers incapable of consenting to the job. If dangerous work equals exploitation, now consider one of the most common arguments used against sex work. The work is dangerous, therefore the entire industry must be exploitative. If we applied that reasoning consistently across the economy, construction would be an obvious candidate for prohibition. Workers can be injured or killed. The environment is hazardous. Workers may be economically vulnerable. Contractors profit while workers absorb risk. Follow that logic far enough, and the conclusion becomes simple. Dangerous work equals exploitation. Therefore, construction should be illegal. Few people actually believe this, imagining the criminalization of construction, but imagine how such a policy would work. Police might raid job sites the way law enforcement currently raids underground economies. Workers holding drills, ladders, or nail guns could be arrested for engaging in dangerous labor. Contractors organizing crews might face charges for facilitating hazardous work. Property owners hiring someone to repair a roof or pour a foundation could be prosecuted for creating demand. The goal would be to eliminate the industry, but buildings would still need repairs. Infrastructure would still need maintenance. Homes would still need construction. The work would not disappear. It would move underground. Workers would be less likely to report injuries because seeking medical treatment could expose them to criminal charges. Wage theft would increase because workers operating in illegal markets have fewer ways to enforce payment. Safety inspections would effectively vanish because no contractor invites regulators onto a job site that could lead to arrest. The work would continue, the protections would disappear. Some policymakers might propose a different solution, legalization with heavy regulation. Another policy model sometimes proposed in sex work debates is partial criminalization, where workers themselves are technically legal, but the people who hire them are not. Imagine applying that approach to construction. Workers could legally offer their labor, but property owners who hired them could face criminal penalties. Contractors coordinating crews could be prosecuted for facilitating dangerous work. The theory would be that eliminating demand would eliminate the industry. But demand for construction would not vanish. Buildings would still need repair. Roads would still need paving. Homes would still need renovation. Instead, hiring would simply become more secretive. Payments would move into informal channels. Workers would lose the ability to advertise or negotiate openly because the transaction itself would carry legal risk. Once again, the work would continue, just with fewer protections. When safety equipment becomes evidence, the thought experiment becomes even clearer when we look at tools. Every industry relies on tools that help workers do their jobs more safely and efficiently. In construction, that means drills, ladders, scaffolding, nail guns, hard hats, harnesses, respirators, and steel-toe boots. Many of these tools exist specifically to reduce risk. Now imagine if the legal system treated construction tools the way condoms have historically been treated in some sex work enforcement contexts. For years, in several U.S. cities, police used condoms as evidence in prostitution-related arrests. Carrying condoms could be cited as proof of illegal activity. Public health advocates spent years pushing to end this practice because the outcome was obvious. If condoms could get you arrested, some people carried fewer of them. From a policy perspective, that would be like police treating hard hats or safety harnesses as evidence of intent to commit illegal construction. If workers believed carrying a safety harness could be used against them in court, some would simply stop carrying it. The danger would not disappear. The protective equipment would. No serious policymaker proposes this because we intuitively understand something simple. Tools do not create exploitation. Tools help workers manage risk. The policy lesson. This thought experiment highlights a broader lesson. When the law begins treating workers' safety equipment as proof of criminal activity, the work rarely disappears. What disappears instead are the protections that make the work safer. You cannot arrest danger out of an economy. But you can make dangerous work even more dangerous by pretending that criminalization is the same thing as protection. At Swap Behind Bars, we believe that people deserve the same rights, safety, and dignity at work regardless of the job they do. Our organization is a national network led by current and former sex workers that provides support, advocacy, and resources for people impacted by the criminalization of the sex trade. We created this series as a thought experiment to examine the logic often used to justify criminalizing sex work. By applying those same arguments to other forms of labor, we hope readers can see more clearly how criminalization actually works in practice. History shows that arresting workers does not eliminate risk, exploitation, or poverty. It simply pushes people further from safety and support. Our goal is not to trivialize other professions, but to invite a deeper conversation about labor, autonomy, and what real worker protection actually looks like.